get started. I haven't seen Sarah join us yet. I've sent her a text. I assume she will be, but in the meantime, we'll get started. And if we don't see her, Danielle and Katie are more than capable of holding up the issue of water. And why is water such a political issue? It just astounds me. Had a discussion with somebody recently, and we were talking about somebody in the press, but I said something about, messaging, and we needed to get better messaging into all parts of the state. And he said, well, you got to understand, he was mansplaining to me, which of course doesn't go over very well. And he started to explain to me that, abortion and immigration are such big issues in the middle of the state. And I said, I'm not talking about abortion or immigration. I'm talking about water. And do you really think anybody goes in and says, hey, I'm a Republican, so I'm going to vote to continue to have poisoned water in my system? I just don't think people understand what a big issue this is and why it's a political issue. And so we're really excited today to have 3 speakers who are leading the cause for all of us in Harrisburg. I'm Christine Jacobs. For those who don't know me, I'm the executive director of Represent PA. We are the largest PAC supporting women running for the state legislature from all across the Commonwealth, Democratic women. Our goal is to flip the legislature and to do it with strong progressive women so that the women that you're going to see on today's call are in the majority and can really make things happen for all of us. We're thrilled to have one of, several of our good friends on this call today. Katie Muth is in her first term still, it's hard to believe, as a senator from Southeast Pennsylvania. She's in environmental resources and energy. I recently saw, is it really true that you're working on some of the pension issues, state pension issues also? So everywhere we look, there's Katie Muth defending all of us. And we look forward to supporting her in her re-election campaign coming up. And just been chatting also with Danielle Friel-Otten. Danielle is in her second term in the state legislature. It probably feels like her whole life. She came up and started working on these environmental issues because the pipeline showed up in her backyard, and has really done a lot of work and has been a strong supporter of legislation. Again, they're working. Danielle started by thinking about the pipeline in her yard, but water is a statewide issue. And so by electing strong women who care about these issues, we can change the whole Commonwealth. And Sarah Innamorato is also in her second term. She's a strong progressive voice for all of us in Harrisburg on a wide variety of issues, from urban affairs to water. And so that's why we're happy to have this team with us today. A couple of things I wanted to remind you of early on. First, the Pennsylvania primaries, May 18th. There's 4 very important ballot questions there. And it's really important that even if you're aren't sure who to vote for in some of the primaries for local elections, for school board, it's so important that you vote on these ballot issues. There's also some special legislative elections. There's Senate District 22, Senate District 48, House District 59, and House District 60 are all on the ballot in May. Represent is very happy to be supporting and having invested in the campaign of Mariah Fisher, who's a candidate in House District 59. It's a push for that district to go Democratic, but she's a strong person and we're very happy to support her. And finally, you'll remember, for those of you who have seen it, we've had a lot of discussions about the judicial races coming up. The video of our discussion on judicial races is available on our website and our YouTube channel, but it's important to vote. Redistricting is coming up, and if the 4 leaders of the legislature don't decide who the 5th member of the redistricting commission is, that gets appointed by the Supreme Court. Pennsylvania has an elected Supreme Court that currently has a Democratic majority. We need to keep focus on the judicial races, even though it's something many of us hadn't thought a lot about before. This is why this one kills me, is that why this is a political issue. Water continues to decline. The 2020 DEP report found over 25,000 miles of streams in Pennsylvania have impaired quality. These are streams that you might walk past in your local parks. It may be the source of the water for your district. That's a 25% increase over the number that were impaired just 4 years earlier. Our water is getting worse. US News rates Pennsylvania as 40th in combined air and water quality, 40th in the United States in terms of our air and water quality. I like to say, of course, it is my bias, that's similar to the, how we rank in terms of the number of women in elected office in our legislature. These are just issues that affect everybody in the state. And why aren't we focusing on them? Another organization rates Pennsylvania as having the worst tap water in the country, with thousands of water companies in Pennsylvania failing to meet EPA standards. And these are throughout the state of Pennsylvania. Okay, so let's move on to our special speakers. And we're really proud today to have them with us. So who's starting? Danielle, Katie?
My name is Danielle Friel-Otten, and I'm the state representative here in the 155th in Central Chester County. And as Christine said, my path to the legislature was paved through a pipeline that went through my backyard. And I pulled a one story today because I feel like it's like one story that means a lot to me. It's the reason I never quit. And it also is the story of so many people in Pennsylvania. And so a little over a year ago, I was on Facebook. So when I first started this work, before I ever considered running for office, the work that I was doing in my community and organizing within my community was around getting the DEP to understand the hundreds and hundreds of deficiencies that were in the permitting applications of Sunoco Energy Transfer Partners for the Mariner East Pipeline, and how they could potentially impact people's lives, not just the environment, but people's lives and their health. And one thing that really stands out to me is that we kept reminding them that even though we live in southeastern Pennsylvania, where most people have public, or like what we call public water, but it's actually public privately owned water corporations, and that's a whole nother story. But most people are on some level of a managed, regulated public water system. But we still have pockets of southeastern Pennsylvania that rely on well water where public water isn't even accessible to them. And so I remember talking about in 2017, 4th of July weekend, on our neighborhood Facebook page, a neighbor who was new to the neighborhood posted a message saying that she had brown mud coming out of her faucet. Long story short, after knocking on some doors, figuring what was going on, the pipeline construction had hit the aquifer that's right behind my home. And while my family were up on the ridge, we have public water. The homes behind me all had wells. And so 26 families' wells were destroyed by pipeline construction. Thankfully, they live in the middle of West Whiteland Township. They were able to negotiate a deal with the company paid to put public water in, all fine for them, but not all fine for everybody. Like the Tar family. Last year, this photo popped up on my Facebook feed, and I don't know if I think you can see how dirty that water is, but this is Erica Tar's little girl. And I don't know if you could guess where in Pennsylvania this is. It might shock you. For those of us who are from the suburbs of southeastern Pennsylvania, that's in Edgemont, Pennsylvania, one of the wealthiest, most affluent parts of the southeastern collar counties. But in Edgemont, Pennsylvania, specifically where the Tars live, there is no access to public water. And the same thing we had been warning about, this is 2020, the same thing we had been warning about since 2016. We kept saying, Edgemont does not have access to public water. And lo and behold, families in Edgemont last year all ended up, because of drilling activities, with poisoned well water and living on water buffaloes and deliveries of water to their home in one of the most affluent suburbs of Philadelphia, not out in the rural parts of Pennsylvania, where this is an enormous widespread problem because of drilling activities and our lack of regulatory oversight. I'm going to share a quick video of an update, because what's even more disgusting about this to me is that it continues. This is 2020. And I was going to look for that photo this morning, and I saw that they had posted an update on their Facebook about what's going on here. And so basically this problem was caused not just by the drilling activity, but the drilling activity disturbed a legacy pollution site that all of those homes were built on top of. There had been a jet fuel spill 20 some years ago. It disturbed the plume that was underground and has now created a situation where they cannot find any clean water on that property. So this just pulls back the curtains on not just our regulatory oversight, but also our zoning and our local governments and how important they are to protecting people's public health. So I'm going to show the video of the update, but they've spent upwards of $40,000. They've spent $40,000 drilling new wells, putting new equipment into their home, and they still cannot get clean drinking water in their home. So I'm going to quickly share my screen. Can you guys see my screen? This
Yes.
cute little girl. Okay. So this is.
What? What do you want? What about it?
I don't like blood. I don't like blood. Oh, no, 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 look at no, no, no.
You can't go in there. What? What do you want? What about it?
Sorry, I wanted to turn that off before I went on, but if that doesn't break your heart, I don't know what does. Every day that I go to Harrisburg, every time I sit in an ERE meeting and I have to deal with Daryl Metcalf and his obstruction of anything good and his proliferation of all things bad, including next week we'll go up against what they call the dirty dozen, which is a dozen bills that the Republicans have introduced to roll back regulation on things like clean water. I think of the Tar family, and I think of that little girl and how she's growing up, and just like that, the precious times that you have with your kids, and that this family doesn't deserve this. Erica is a NICU nurse at CHOP. She does incredible work. She's serving our community, and she's dealing with an absolute nightmare in her home that her and her husband, they're a young family. It's like, think about your first home that you bought, and can you imagine something like this happening? And Sunoco is not being held accountable. The DEP will not, while the neighbors just down the road were able to get testing through the DEP that has demonstrated that the company is responsible for the pollution in their well. The TARs have not gotten the same support from the DEP, and so they are continue to be on their own and launched a GoFundMe site this week to help them to get clean water. Because on top of this situation, you can't sell a house that does not have clean water. And so I don't know if there's anything that drives the point home more profoundly than that. But Harrisburg is a really scary place for someone like me who's a mom who has little kids just like Erica, and who really worries about what we're leaving them and what we're putting into their bodies and how that is going to impact them into their future with not just their health, but their their cognitive abilities, their we talk about things like lead in our water. Our kids in Pennsylvania are just as bad as Flint in terms of the aging water infrastructure we have here and the amount of lead that our kids are ingesting, especially in our cities. And so we need to do this work, and we need moms. Like I'll never forget the first time I met with Josh McNeil from Conservation Voters. He said, "How do you think we can get more people to care about environmental issues?" And I said, elect more women, elect mothers, because we are the protectors of our kids and their health, and we understand how important the water they drink and the air that they breathe is to their very existence and their future, and we'll fight for that. So sorry if I get emotional. It's like super personal for me, not just because like I care a lot about this family, but my own family has gone through a nightmare with these corporations that are just completely taking over our lives. And it's really, really infuriating. And that is why I continue the work. And I'm so grateful to have a senator that is my overlap, like we overlap. Katie Muth is my senator, and she is out there fighting on the front lines with me. And so I'm so grateful to have her as a partner in this work.
So I'm going to agree that if it weren't for Rep. Otten here, this would be an intolerable fight, in that it gets very lonely in the General Assembly, being someone, willing to take on the tough fights. And so that's what we do. And so unfortunately, in 2020, water is one of those tough fights that we're still trying to get every Pennsylvanian clean drinking water. And I think I've mentioned this before, and I'm embarrassed that I'm a lifelong Pennsylvanian and did not know how bad this was until the last 2 years of my life that I've really learned about it. And so, growing up in Western Pennsylvania is where I spent the first 6 years of my life. So I lived in Westmoreland County, which is now heavily fracked, right next to Washington County, which is has the most fracking pads in the state, the most wells in our state for gas and oil. And so, you kind of, what's not right in your backyard, you don't see. And I think that's why, as Rep. Otten mentioned, when you have, entities, corporate entities that say, guess what, we don't care that you own this property or that this is your, your land, we're coming through and we're doing what we got to do. And because for the sake of profit. And so Pennsylvania has over 77,000 miles of pipeline. I think you can wrap that around the world. I think 2.5 times, it might be 3, don't quote me, but at least 2.5 times. And so when you sort of think about that number, you're like, okay, like we use natural gas to heat our stoves. And so you can kind of go back and forth of like what types of pipelines these are, but we all live downstream. And that means what happens in the western part of the state impacts what happens in this side of the state, both economically, environmentally, and public health wise. And so when we talk about getting elected to represent a district, we all know one vote of a legislator matters for the whole Commonwealth. And so, finding out that many of my constituents, even as of December, have had private well water supply destroyed by Sunoco. This is the United States of America. This isn't a developing third world country. And, there is people in Pennsylvania that haven't had clean drinking water in over 12 years. And so if you go to Washington County or Susquehanna County and see what it's like to have bottled water and then have a water buffalo to just cook and bathe with, I can't even, I'm not really good at camping without like a cabin. So like, I can't imagine having to and I'm just being honest, like the burden of like going through your day, going to, at the end of the week, driving, to go pay to fill up your water buffalo, bring it back in, buy all the chemicals to treat it because it's still not drinkable water, but at least you can bathe and cook with it because somebody, whether it's Cabot Oil, Range Resources, Sunoco, Chesapeake, add to the list. I think you all know how I feel about Halliburton. There is no corporate responsibility. They're literally stripping resources from our Commonwealth and leaving a mess behind. And so this has been an ongoing problem. And the most frustrating thing about it is that the legislature, the General Assembly, has power to change it. But you know who also has the power in an administrative capacity is the governor and the secretary of the DEP. And so when Rep. Otten and I have to kick, scream, and yell to have someone come out and look at 10,000 gallons of drilling fluid, which we don't know what's in it because it's proprietary information, still in a lake, how many months later, and say, you're gonna make them clean this up before you allow them to start drilling again? And despite the fact in statute, the DEP has the authority to revoke and deny permits of any gas and oil operator for a history of notice of violations, for a history of consent order and agreements, which is essentially just a settlement after they've polluted everywhere. And Sunoco on energy transfers, Sunoco's Mariner East project, 17 counties. In Chester County alone, I think, Danielle, correct me, I thought someone said it the other day, we just hit our 105th notice of violation in just Chester County or something.
Oh, it's well over 100, yes.
Okay, well, so, I mean, just for, yeah, so think of it, 17 counties. Raystown Lake is just filled of drilling fluid. Because that's not a Commonwealth-owned lake or a drinking water supply, they left it in there. So when we talk about this, how would you know? And so you think about this permitted project that got routed through an affluent area, right? You're going through the wealthiest county in the state, and people are mad as hell that this is coming through their property. Then think about the people that live in these rural counties that you know, literally it might have done the same thing to their land and their property rights, but there's not that same kind of momentum, you know? And so the other problem is once it's buried, people don't know it's there and they think everything's fine. And then we've learned all the problems with leaking, with poor construction to begin with. We've seen same thing with energy transfer with the Revolution pipeline in Beaver County that exploded and had stability issues to this moment. And so we're hearing the same thing, that ethane cracker plant in Beaver County, that pipeline, is it Rover? Is that what it is, Danielle? I think it's Rover, coming from Ohio. Huge, huge whistleblower case right now about how it's not stable. It's been built, parts of it have been constructed already, and it's not stable. So when you look, and again, I'm not the secretary of the DP and I'm not the governor, but I don't know how people look at themselves in the mirror every morning and think like I'm doing my job when you're allowing this to happen. And so I don't know if it's just complicit. I don't know if it's just lack of resources, understaffing, but everybody knows how to fucking read. And so if the governor and the DEP secretary can't bother to read, like Danielle and I are up until 2:30 in the morning, reading documents, reading permits, reading water testing, then they should be too. And so we sit here and there's been 25 years of no voting on a lead water remediation bill in the General Assembly, despite over 20 being introduced. Never had a vote on it. That we don't require private well water standards. So there's no oversight on that. Testing is at your discretion. And which is a huge problem, because then when someone comes in to drill through your backyard, they say, oh, well, this was here before we got here. And Pennsylvania has a high level of radon. Radon is naturally occurring. It is very deep within the ground. But when you frack, and hydraulic fracturing brings up wastewater, and guess what comes up with it? Radon. And that's radioactive. And guess where that goes? Into approved landfills. I think there's 15 or 14 in Pennsylvania, where that waste gets dumped into and then leaches into the river system. If you want to really blow your mind, Google Bell Vernon landfill. If Sarah were on, she would go on a rant about this. Leaching into the Monongahela River. And so when I say we all live downstream, we all live downstream. And so yay to Tom Wolf for not allowing fracking in the Delaware River basin. Well, it's any different about Western Pennsylvania. Why is that water and river system any different? Still, it's a drinking water supply. And so I think when we talk about lack of regulations, safety, this is common sense stuff. I think there's just not enough Pennsylvanians that know this, that they're not protected. Like I said, I've lived here my whole life and assumed that these protections existed. Like, how could we not test for fill in the blank in my water? How could that not be? And that's the truth. And so the public awareness piece, because water is not partisan. When I go to Susquehanna County, it is not a bunch of, tree hugging Democrats with banned fracking shirts on. It's Republicans, it's independents, it's elected Republicans saying, hey, they're about to approve a liquid natural gas train line to come from Susquehanna County to New Jersey, next to all of this crap in Susquehanna County where Cabot Oil has poisoned people's water and just was charged with 15 felonies last fall and is awaiting trial. And what does the DEP do? They give him 50 plus new permits since getting charged with 15 felonies. And you think, how can they be given new permits? They were just charged with 15, like, and that's legal. And so I think just some of those mind-blowing things are the conversations I hope you all can have, and just taking that, some of these little like, whoa, I didn't know there was 77,000 miles of pipeline, when we don't have enough pipeline inspectors in the state of Pennsylvania to even inspect a quarter of that. And so knowing that, I think the only way to change this is obviously who's calling the shots.
Right.
So thank you, Christine, and everyone else for helping mobilize that effort. And because it can't just be 5 of us. I mean, we're fighting the fight, please don't get me wrong, but and especially if the federal government is going to send 39 or 37 billion dollars to Pennsylvania over 2 years, there damn well better be an effort to have every single Pennsylvanian hooked up to clean drinking water, period. I don't want to hear about how it's too much money and too far away and blah, blah, blah. And I really want these corporations to pay for it. But at this point, you know, if you've been without water for 12 years, I would say, you know, federal money is just fine to hook people up to water, because this is America and this is Pennsylvania, and it's criminal. And so some of the bills we have will never see the light of day. As Rep. Otten said, she's on the environmental committee, and so am I. Gene Yaw's a little bit different than Daryl Metcalf. Gene Yaw's he's the chairman. He has Halliburton stocks. Check out that statement of financial interest. It's very fun. And you know, he's in Susquehanna County. That's his area. Like a worker from Cabot Oil died 2 weeks ago on a frac pad at midnight. What are you doing at midnight on a frac pad? So my grandma used to say nothing after 10 p.m. was any good. So I'm going to say that that's something shady was going on up there. But
Lady Danielle, if I could ask you a couple questions.
Yes.
First of all, we've been talking a lot about fracking. There's so much other garbage in Pennsylvania water. The PFOAs,
Oh, yeah.
runoff from pharmaceutical plants who have dumped effluent in the water, the lead pipes, the everything else. I'm assuming that as we look towards what we'd like to see in both a DEP, but also in the legislature, I'm assuming all of these things are in there too. It's a whole chemistry set.
The PFAS issue is so interesting because I actually just watched the movie Dark Waters for the first time a couple weeks ago, and my mind was blown. Because it's insane, because I remember growing up at the time that like Teflon was like becoming big, and also the tactics are the same regardless of the polluter. They're all, the way that these corporations operate, they all operate the same way. The baseball billboards that have, you know, the name of the company and the donations they make to build a ball field, Energy Transfer just did that in Exton. Same thing. The tactics are the same regardless of what entity is polluting our water and our land and our air. But yeah, the PFAS thing was really interesting because the only way we were able to get PFAS, any kind of PFAS issues addressed, was because Todd Stevens is a vulnerable Republican in Montgomery County, and the Willow Grove Air Base has a huge PFAS problem. But they weren't willing to do it for the whole state. They were only willing to do it for the Willow Grove Air Base because Toll Brothers wants to build a development there.
And that's Senator Collette's bill, just so everybody knows. I want everyone to know that Senator Collette had that bill, and Tom Wolf gave it to Todd Stevens and gutted her bill down to garbage. So she reintroduced the best version of the bill again this session. It's SB 612. So please just put that on a post-it, because Todd Stevens is terrible, and Senator Collette has been screaming about PFAS, not Todd Stevens. I refuse to let a mediocre man get the credit. I pardon me for interrupting.
No, but that's Katie is very correct on that. But like the PFAS issue, the only
By the way, Senator Collette is another first-time senator who's up for re-election next time. Represent gave her $8,000 in her primary and early on in her race, and we were her first early supporters. So again, you want to know what happens, what Represent is working on? We're working to elect these kind of women.
Yeah. And
Also
Senator,
with PFAS, Danielle, isn't there a place in Senator Committed's district where there's PFAS remediate? It's right on the line, I think, of where her and I bump up district lines. There's in Chester County where there's PFAS. And so I thought it was like just the air base. I mean, this PFAS.
no, it's everywhere.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is everywhere and it is incredibly challenging to remediate.
And they would not, like, literally, we tried to amend this bill to say, like, okay, fine, if you're going to make it a corporate giveaway, whatever, like, we need to get it fixed. Let's just make it statewide that everybody's eligible for this program, because PFAS is a problem across Pennsylvania. They passed the bill, I think, like maybe 2 weeks before the DEP was releasing their full report on PFAS in Pennsylvania. Refused to expand it outside of that Willow Grove area. And so
I just want to add to that, because Senator Collette later, when I was raging about all the water things in Susquehanna County to her on the phone one morning, and I was like, I don't understand Patrick McDonald, like, just like, this is water, like, and she said, you don't get it. When I met with him for my PFAS bill, we said, why can't the state set a PFAS limit? There's no limit set. Trump wouldn't set one through the EPA. So we're hopeful that the new EPA people will set this limit. It's been in the works. New Jersey's Attorney General, I think last year, came out with this scathing report and made the state set a level. And Secretary McDonald said to Senator Collette, but well, if we set a level, we could be criminally indicted because it's like Flint, Michigan. So they didn't want to set a level. And I said, you don't think you're going to be criminally indicted when you fail to do it for gross negligence, when they find out that this, I mean, like, when there's massive real studies, not fake phony DEP studies, like, you don't think you're gonna be in trouble then? And so you sit there and you think, like, what you knew, you might not have known everything as we move through life, but when you know something's wrong, then you fix it. Like, science develops, you read stuff, you find out we should take care of this. And there's PFAS everywhere. You're absolutely right. Pennsylvania's water infrastructure, from a pipe standpoint, we have lead in our water, we have lead pipe issues. I mean, that's jobs. There's a jobs platform right there, right? As replacing all of those.
And a couple people have asked what PFAS are, and it's PFOAS and it's also PFAS, and it's a chemical surfactant. And a surfactant is something that prevents things from sticking. So originally it came into the nomenclature because it's in Teflon. And have you ever heard, don't use Teflon because it leaches something that gets into your system? These are the chemicals that come out of the original Teflon. But as a surfactant, it's also used in jet fuel and all over our military bases. And so it leaks out of there. And again, it gets into the water and it's a carcinogen.
And the firefighting foam that they had used.
Yes, because again, it's a surfactant, it prevents things from sticking, and that's why it's in there. So, and it's freely, clean. It started coming out of our water system into our water from Teflon, but now it's around military bases. And as our two speakers have said, it's all over the state of Pennsylvania. Again, who knew? And the big question people have is, tell us again why the DEP doesn't act. Is it, I had heard at one point it's because they don't have any money for inspectors. You're talking about they refuse to try and set a limit because they're afraid they're criminally liable, which they are anyway. What is wrong with our DEP? And I understand the legislature because they're all getting money from the oil companies and the chemical companies. It's, my belief.
I would say there's two things. Yes, funding is a challenge for the DEP. They've stripped the DEP of more than 1,000 staffers over the last few years by basically, if you ever watch a House ERE committee meeting, Darryl Metcalf's sole goal is to strip the Department of Environmental Protection of every ability it has to enforce environmental regulation. That is a truth. That said, we do still have a DEP staff, and from my perspective, I've never worked in a job where budget was not an issue, right? Like every job any of us have ever had, we never have enough money to do our jobs to the full extent that we want to. And so when you're doing the job that you do have the funding to do, and that you do have the capacity to do, you need to do that well. And our DEP is absolutely not doing that job well. And there's lots of reasons for that. I think one of the big ones that is like an unspoken is that a lot of there is no, in Pennsylvania, we don't like, so for legislators, which is strange because Pennsylvania has very few anti-corruption regulations for legislators, but for state employees, there is no non-compete or like limit in terms of like where you can go to work after you retire. So a lot of these guys guys and gals, I'm not going to say it's just men, primarily men in those agencies, but they will work their 25, 35 years. They will leave their jobs where they make like $80,000 to $100,000, so they're good jobs, and they will be able to collect a state pension. For those folks who have been with the state since before, I think sometime in the early 2000s, they changed this, but state employees get healthcare for life. And then they go and they collect their pensions and double dip and go work for the industry. So a lot of these folks are just biding their time until they go and they collect upwards of 6 figures and their pensions and their healthcare for life with the oil and gas industry. And so Chris Sappy actually is about to introduce a bill. It was recommended in Josh Shapiro's grand jury report that would limit the ability of state employees to go and work for the industries that they regulate. Pennsylvania has no laws preventing that at this point.
Didn't Mike Turzai go to work for a
Yes.
gas company? Mike
Yes.
Turzai, former Speaker of the PA House. Yes, that's where he went.
And also, I'd like to chime in the fact that our secretaries of the various state agencies are appointed by the governor. So they're not, they're Senate confirmed, but even then that's a shady way of interviewing someone for a job. So these people are hand selected. You know, the other part of the funding thing is that the state's dollars into the DEP have changed. It's actually under Governor Ed Rendell that gutted funding for the DEP.
Yep.
And so this isn't an RD problem, unfortunately. We can't point all the fingers to the other side. And so now we're funded, only 33% of DEP's funding, it might be 32, is from the state. The bulk of the funding literally comes from fines and a little bit from the permitting fees, because from gas and oil.
Yeah, Ed Rendell was, by the way, for everybody, just because Ed Rendell was governor when the decision was made not to put in severance taxes on the oil and gas drilling, where every other state charges companies for the amount of gas and oil they take out of the state. Pennsylvania is the only state in the country that doesn't, and that decision was reached when Ed Rendell was governor. So again, okay. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I want you to tell us, do we have any hopes? Can water become a major issue in the gubernatorial race? And what else would you like us to do? You know, you've got 50 activists on the phone who keep putting into the thing, hey, you know, what do I do? What do you want me to do? Who do I call? What would you like to tell us today? We can send out an email to everybody saying, here's the phone numbers, but what would you like us to do?
Put the heat on the Wolf administration, make it an election issue, make water an election issue, make it an issue. They hate bad press. They hate even being tweeted at. I get yelled at all the time. I think that the more awareness that we grow organically amongst our groups, we all know people across the state. You know, please stay tuned to Danielle and I's adventure into the Sunoco realm of hell that's continuing as they go into settlements and a reroute plan. There'll be public comment, public hearing. Get people to participate in public comment when we'll send out the info to you, Christine, so people can, you know, like put input. If we get 30,000 people with public comment about how this thing's a disaster, it does have some impact. You know, I think, you know, for Danielle and I, we will certainly have a hard reelect because of our views on this. The building trades and unions are certainly difficult to work with on this issue. Because
can you imagine the amount of money that's going to pour in against Katie and Danielle for having these kind of discussions? It's because Pennsylvania has no limits on the amount of money and the amount of influence corporations and people can have. This is money from all over the country that is coming in against these. I think, Katie, what were you called? The AOC of Pennsylvania at some point, you know?
Oh, I think I'm the number 2 target, not because my district's actually a little bit bluer, but I've become public enemy number 1 for an array of reasons, but certainly the environment, trying to save the earth, is one of them.
This is
I will
just,
say,
but you know, we think of you as our warriors, and we think of you as people just who are explaining this to all of us. And so much of what we need in Pennsylvania is this kind of education on what's going on. And that's why we're really proud of you, but it's scary. What else would you like us to do?
well, I will say, they, just to piggyback on the last bit, they spent $325,000 against me alone in the primary last year. So just so you know, they're going to get a twofer in 2022. So Katie and I'm sure, because we're in overlapping districts, so I'm sure we'll be, I'm sure we'll both be like, they'll be coming for us again. But
Maybe they'll make a billboard after us.
well, they drove a billboard truck
around.
around with my face throughout my whole neighborhood. But but the other thing that I would suggest that you all do is pay attention next week in the House. The Dirty Dozen is what they're being called. There is a package of 12 bills coming through the House. If you're in a Republican district, make sure your legislator knows that you're paying attention. That would roll back regulations to a pretty significant degree to allow more pollution in Pennsylvania, and to also like, there's one where it creates this officer of compliance where, like, if like corporations don't like a ruling from the DEP, this compliance officer would work with them to like make it a better ruling. Like, it's crazy. So this is coming next week. And also want to lift up Josh Shapiro's grand jury report from last year. There were a lot of really good recommendations. We're about to launch a package of bills that address the legislative recommendations that they made. But it's not lost on anyone here that Josh Shapiro is going to be running for governor. And so when he's running for governor, we're going to hold him accountable to his own grand jury report and to taking action on that. And so really would appreciate all of your consciousness around that and work to really help Josh know that this is an important issue for us. This is an important issue for Pennsylvania. And he has acknowledged through his own office and his own work how much work there is to be done. So I think there's 2 things right there that everybody can be a part of.
A couple people, somebody just asked for talking points. So if between Danielle and Katie, if you could give us a half a dozen talking points that will get out to everybody so that when they call people, they know what to say. The other thing I think that I just saw, and you know, comments about, you both made comments about, the building trades are not real fond of you because they view these to be union jobs. It's a really funny dichotomy in Pennsylvania that these supposedly the unions tend to lean Democratic, but they don't like a lot of the candidates that Represent has supported. It's one of the reasons Represent got started. Yes, to support women, but yes, to support different thinking. And they are not fond of a lot of our candidates because they take positions like this. And it's another reason this is just so important that we figure out ways to get you support, both funding, but also make sure that everybody is raising their voices.
I'm gonna drop a link to a document that I just downloaded into the comments. It's a Word doc. For everybody, this is the Democratic caucus's talking points for these bills that are coming next week. So hopefully they'll be helpful to folks on the call. Oh wait, I opened it instead of moving it. Hold on 1 second.
Katie, anything else you want to tell us, anything else you want us to do, feel free to send it on and we'll be happy to forward things to everybody who called in today.
I have like 15 pages of talking
15
points
pages.
for all the issues we talked on. So I don't know if you want me to scale it down or just send you that, but I could do whatever. I could
Why
do
don't you send it to us that way, and our team will,
because
Jamie
there's
will
some
help
bills
scale it down.
mentioned. Yeah, bills mentioned than just basic talking points. So whatever you want to use for each issue that we went through, you can.
That's great.
Okay.
And somebody else mentioned that she'd written an op-ed on water quality. Anything else we can get into the press throughout the state is really good because, again, going back to the point I made earlier about water it's a statewide issue. It affects every county in Pennsylvania. And the more we get out the word about this, so how to be a conservation voter, how to vote for your own water and the own safety of your own household is very important. Yeah, Danielle's going to email me the document and Jamie will get it out to everybody. Any closing words for us?
Thanks for
It's
supporting us.
quite a Thursday, it's quite a Friday morning to, to be looking at my water this way.
Well, hopefully we can get it cleaned up. And I think this is one of the, even though it's a heavy lift, it's one of the easier issues from a partisan standpoint, and it's a public health problem. So, I think if we just kind of unite together and make this an issue both for federal dollars and election issue, whoever wants to be against it, I haven't found a single person willing to go on the record, building trades or whoever, to say, we don't need clean water. So, I mean,
They act against it, and that's that holding their feet to the fire is the important thing to do.
Danielle.
Yeah, and with that, I always try to end by offering some hope. There is really great, I have a lot of hope, especially after listening to President Biden's speech this week. Joe Biden has been more aggressive on climate work and environmental work than I ever imagined he would or could be. This American Jobs Plan, the American Infrastructure Plan, offers a really great opportunity for us to get funding to the state to be able to address some of these issues. And so I'm super grateful for all of the work that all of you have done, because even though our state legislature is still a mess, we have moved things forward, and we will have the ability to continue to move forward. And one thing I've learned in our role in the legislature is we work with what we've got, we use the leverage we have, and sometimes it's not always a piece of legislation that's passing, but it's pressure we can put on something, or like federal funding that can be allocated via the executive branch or the administration instead of going through the legislature, because the legislature is going to misappropriate it. So there are ways for this money to get to the right places. And so really helping the governor know that this is a priority, these environmental issues are a priority, and there is hope. And so we have made progress, and what's happening at the federal level is more than I ever imagined it would be right now. And so keep encouraging it, keep letting our federal elected officials know that we like it, we want more, and we're all going to keep fighting. So thank you for all of the work that you're doing. And Claudette Williams, if you're still on, I want to connect with you, because John and I the last represent call that I was on, I mentioned that John and I were looking at a condo up in Pinecrest, because that was where the host was from. And we have a place up in Claudette's district now. So Claudette would love to work with you on your next go round to take the Poconos and turn them blue. So thank you all for.
And thank you for saying that. Claudette's district is one that we're hoping for some map help on. A little shifting of the lines would make a huge a difference in that race that where Claudette ran. So thank you both. Thank you to our speakers so much. I think it's, and I'm thank you for ending on the note of hope, Danielle. But we've got elections coming up in 2022 for governor, for United States Senator, who would be working on allocating more funds to Pennsylvania, and for all of our state reps, and clearly, half of our state senators, including Senator Muth. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. I keep talking about you need to be part of the movement. One of the things that, and I've had a slide in the past on this one where it just scares me. Danielle talked about, and Katie have talked about the fact that money is coming from the federal government, but it scares me as to where the money's going and who's going to get to allocate it. And if it's some of the same people who are allocating funds today, it makes me nervous. Because sure, funds can be coming for the environment and for water, but if it goes, remember Danielle was talking about, well, we could have a commission, so if somebody gets fined, we can have people talk about what they might do. Not a good use of the funds. A better use of the funds is to get in earlier to set requirements and have a way for paying for remediation. So we're going to get back to all of you with some comments, some of the things that they talked about today. And again, I'm so proud of the women that we've supported so far who are in the legislature. I'm proud of the fact that they work together. We just need more of them. So volunteer with us, and also tell us what else you'd like. You know, what else would stir your blood the way water did today? Because it's coming. We're also having a discussion on May 6th with Congresswoman Madeleine Dean to talk a little bit about what's going on in the federal government. Madeleine is, we have a special relationship with her as a state rep because she used to be a state representative from Montgomery County. And Madeleine is, she talked at some of our represent events while she was running for Congress, mostly about the need for change in Harrisburg. And so she can talk to why change is really needed in Harrisburg, what can be done. We're all, you know, many of us are enthusiastic about what we've seen from the president, but so much needs to be done at the state level. And so that'll be part of our conversation with Congresswoman Madeleine Dean. So again, thank you everybody for being on today. You know, clearly I'm hyped. I should go into these sessions with less caffeine in my system, but talking to women like Danielle and Katie just really gets me psyched about the work that Represent is doing. We invested $500,000 in races last cycle. We've got $100,000 in the bank, but we want to raise a lot more. We're looking forward to a positive effect from these map changes, and we need to have the funding to do it. So thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Happy Friday.